So one of the most common questions we get asked is what are additional inquiries and what sort of inquiries are there? So in our Q&A guide notes, which you can ask for, I'm going to just read through here. Number one is what are inquiries raised by the buyer solicitors. I'm going to go through each one of those for you. You can actually get this in print. It's a quick video. So one of the questions asked is what are restricted covenants? Again, we've got a separate video for that, but essentially what restricted covenants are is a covenant is another name for an obligation. So a restricted covenant is where you have to oblige not to do something. A positive covenant is where you have to do something. Again, your lawyer will explain that, but if you just substitute the word covenant for an obligation, a positive or a negative. Okay. The other question we get asked is, do I need to obtain documents from the local authority? That really normally applies if there's things like alterations at your property, which is extensions or loft conversion, or even things like a patio extension and a garden and electrical works. There's all different certificates for that. So look for your paperwork as the seller. If you've got those documents, then please send them to your solicitors. They'll send them to the buyer's solicitors. If those documents are missing, then the buyer solicitor will raise an additional inquiry for that. Now, the question is, do you go back to your local authority and get retrospective consent? We advise don't contact them. Speak to your solicitor first. It's actually crucial that you don't contact your local authority. Because what happens if you go to your local authority and say, have you got those documents? And they're not there, then you have to ask for retrospective consent. Now that could be expensive and it could take months, and by that time you may not be able to sell the property. The buyer may get fed up. Or even worse than that, they may not actually have those documents, in which case you can't even ask for insurance. So the best thing to do is, if those documents are missing, if you're the seller, speak to your lawyer and they may be able to get what's called an insurance policy for you, indemnity insurance. It doesn't really cost very much. It costs probably cheaper, a lot cheaper than actually having to go through the retrospective consent way. And they give that to the buyer solicitors, and then the buyer solicitor will take that as an insurance policy to say, look, if there is a breach, then let's not worry about it because I'll get insurance anyway, so I've got cover for that. So that's not contacting your local authority. Another question we get asked is what's a retention, what's an allowance, and what's the difference between the two? This really applies to if you're buying a leasehold property. Now, in a leasehold properties, things like service charges. Those service charges are paid up front. They could be 6 months up front or any particular period. Now, there's also things like if you're paying up front, what you want to be able to do is make sure that as you're buying the property, that the seller's paid everything up to date. Now, if you're not quite sure at the end of the day, then some lawyers ask for an allowance. A sum of money, maybe £250, to say there's £250 here. Can you gift that to me? Make it an allowance. Can you gift that to me as a seller? Because if there are any additional sums to be paid afterwards, at least I've got £250 to cover some of that. That's the easiest way of dealing with it. Otherwise, some lawyers ask for retention. Now, we don't agree with retention only because it's actually going to cost you more money in the long run. Because the retention is the sum of money to be held back in a particular account. So maybe 6 months to a year or 18 months afterwards, both lawyers have to go back to see if there's been outstanding. If there is, they have to go back to the landlord, to a management company. It takes loads and loads of hours, and then what happens? The cost of that is way more than £250. So we say rather than agreeing a retention, just go for an allowance. Because that's that one. And the last thing is about indemnity insurance. What is indemnity insurance? We've already spoken about that really. So indemnity insurance is really a policy which covers defects. And if you're lucky enough to be able to get indemnity insurance, then grab it with both hands because it's a way to actually purchase the property. And as a seller, it's a way to get out of paying loads of money to get retrospective consent and so forth. AVRillo, you can also ask for what's called a block policy insurance. We can do it right at the beginning for you as the seller. And it avoids paying a higher insurance later on for if you need 1 or 2 indemnity insurance later. If you buy it in block early on, then the insurers are more likely to cover you at a lower cost. Ask about indemnity block insurance as well. So that covers that one there. Thank you.